Hello, I'm Amanda Freitag-Thomas, the General Manager of Envision by World Strides. At Envision by World Strides, we provide immersive career exploration and leadership development programs for elementary, middle, and high school students. You can learn more about what we offer by going to our website, www.envisionexperience.com, and clicking on our programs. I'm excited we can bring a part of the Envision experience into your homes with this panel session featuring 3 speakers from the U.S. Department of State. The speakers address topics such as working during presidential transitions, key areas of focus for the 3 bureaus they represent, advice and guidance for students interested in a career in foreign or civil service, and insight on how students may find and develop their own political voice. Enjoy.
So hello, and welcome to Envision by World Strides Inaugural Speaker Series. My name is Jan Sikorsky, and I'm your moderator for today's conversation. I work here at Envision by World Strides as Vice President for Product Planning and Development. Each summer, we collaborate with our partners at the United States Department of State to bring hundreds of students into the historic halls of the State Department building in Washington, D.C., where they get to hear from State Department officials firsthand. We often hear that the visit to the State Department is a highlight of both our National Youth Leadership Forum on National Security and our Global Youth Leaders Conference. Of course, today, we're not able to host students in Washington, D.C. for a number of reasons. And so instead, we're bringing our conversation with 3 State Department officials straight to the student. Before we jump into this discussion, I'd like to take a moment now for the speakers to introduce themselves. Kara, could you please start?
Sure, thank you so much. My name is Kara Mcdonald. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Deputy Assistant Secretary in the State Department's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor at the Department of State. It's a privilege to speak with you today about how a change in administration works. In practice, inside the U.S. government, I joined the government in 1998 and have served in 6 administrations and through 4 presidential transitions, which were presidential changes of party, including 1 transition at the National Security Council of the White House, where I served during the 2nd George W. Bush transition to the 1st Obama administration.
Thank you, Kara. Christy?
Good afternoon. Actually don't know what time you're watching this, but hello, it's nice to see you. I'm Christy Roberts. I joined the State Department in 2007. I actually first wanted to join the State Department as a middle school student. My dad was in the Army. I was living in Seoul, Korea, and they took us to the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, the border between North and South Korea. And I got to step into North Korea by inside the negotiation building. Up until that point, I knew a lot about the military, but I had no idea what diplomacy was, and I was very curious about the people who sat at the table. And on the way home that day, I told my family that one day I wanted to sit at a table like that, representing the United States and trying to bring about peace. I took kind of a wayward path to get there. I first taught overseas at American schools in El Salvador and Poland before I came to the State Department in 2007. I have served in Tel Aviv and in Algiers. I served as the Jordan Desk Officer and currently cover issues in Iraq for the Bureau of Conflict and Stability Operations. It's great to be here. I was in a similar program in high school in 1988, coming to Washington, sat in the State Department and listened to similar speakers, and it is just a real pleasure and honor for me to be here with you today.
Thank you. Appreciate knowing that. Rafi?
Hello, my name is Rafi Balyan. I use he, him pronouns. I joined the State Department 20 years ago today on January 8, 2001, and took the oath of office, the same oath of office that the President, Vice President, and all the cabinet officials take. And in fact, my colleagues that joined with me today had the opportunity to go to the Lincoln Memorial and recite the oath again in commemoration of our 20th anniversary. I currently serve as the Deputy Director of the Office of Environmental Quality in the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs. The Bureau leads the U.S. government and represents the American people in all of our international environmental, scientific, and health-related discussions and negotiations. And we are currently working on quite a number of important issues that will continue to increase in their importance as we move forward in this transition, as we have done in previous transitions. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those great introductions and certainly for joining us today. To say the least, 2020 was an unprecedented year for us all, and it culminated within an election that had historic voter turnout. With such a dramatic and eventful year now behind us, I think we're all eager to look forward to the future and think about what's next. So with that, I'll ask our first question. Kara, I'll direct this to you, but would love to hear from the other speakers when you're finished with your response. Given that we are up on an administrative transition, what's it like to serve in your role and see that take place? You said, I believe you have seen 6 prior. What are some of the experiences you've had in that in your seats during those times?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the core of people at the State Department who are professional, and that's made up of several categories of people. We have civil servants, we have foreign service officers like myself, and we have a very large cadre of locally employed staff who serve in our embassies overseas. But this cadre and this group of people make up what we call the professional staff. The State Department has about 75,000 employees who serve in the United States and overseas, and it is this professional staff that maintains continuity of operations as well as institutional memory during presidential transitions. I have to say the transition process is a fascinating one to go through. No 2 transitions are alike, and yet at the same time many of the processes are very similar. It's often a surprise, I think, when I'm speaking to student groups and others who are interested in the State Department to talk a little bit about how much work goes on behind the scenes in our foreign policy that is not, in fact, very substantively different between administrations. So everything from department operations, IT, how we manage our real estate, how we make sure that our diplomats overseas have housing, to policy issues like maintaining our treaty relations, maintaining good relations with all of the countries that we work with and governments that we work with. So really underneath the current of the hot topics of the day, there's a very wide swath of work that occurs and that continues to occur consistently throughout and through various presidential transitions. I think if I could point out just a couple of areas of value added of the professional service, it would be, again, to ensure continuity of operations, keeping the wheels turning, uninterrupted foreign policy work, as I mentioned, institutional memory, so understanding and being able to advise on things that have happened in the past, and long-term experience on foreign policy and its operations. I'll give you 2 quick examples of where this has been important to improving and ensuring our department's resilience in transitions. So, for example, at the beginning of the 2nd George Bush administration, Hurricane Katrina occurred about 7 months in, I think, if I have my dates correct. Or during the first Obama administration, the Haiti earthquake occurred less than a year after Obama had taken office. These crises are examples where you want a professional core of people who can advise on and keep things running during a crisis. Again, it reduces our vulnerability to having disruptions to our continuity of operations and being able to respond well in those kinds of scenarios. I think the vast majority of our jobs in the State Department are held by professional and career members of the civil and foreign service and locally employed staff. But I do want to also point out the role of political appointees and give you some background information on that. So political appointees are people who serve at the pleasure of the administration and who are nominated by a specific administration. They typically depart when there is a change of administration to a different party. At the State Department, we work with political appointees in many bureaus and offices, but when parties, when the presidential transition may occur and parties change, career, professional, civil, and foreign service staff usually remain. I would also say, just quickly, before I pass it on to my colleagues, The importance of the professional cadre was also made clear to me when I served at the NSC of the White House during the Bush to Obama transition. In early days of an administration, there's a tremendous learning curve for those who are coming in and who may be new to government. Not all political appointees, of course, are new to government, but many are. Everything from logistics to IT systems to handling classified information to government budgetary processes, the department's organizational chart, the who's who, the interagency community, policy processes. Professional staff advise on that. Imagine, if you will, what would happen if the first decisions of each administration had to be what format to use for a memo, what font to use for our communications, how to get information to the secretary or to the president. This would obviously be very disruptive to actually getting the meat of our work done. So with that, that's a few ideas from my side, but I'll pass it to my other colleagues who I'm sure have good experiences as well.
Kara, that was a very thorough response, and I think there's very little to add to that. And I would agree with everything that you've said in terms of the importance of the professional staff and what we do to ensure the continuity on focus and how we represent the American people and support the policymakers and provide them the information needed in order to make decisions that move U.S. interests forward in the international arena.
I just wanted to share a story about the election right after Obama, the first Obama election in 2008. I was serving in Tel Aviv, and we had a big state visit coming. Condi Rice landed the day after the election. It was very complicated. I was the site officer at the ambassador's residence for 3 different events happening at the residence. There's a flurry whenever this happens. So there's all the transition that happens that Kara and Rafi have talked about. So much paperwork to make sure it's all it all goes as planned. But the work still continues in those 3 months as well. And Condi Rice landed. She had meetings with Tzipi Livni. She was trying to move forward the peace agreement on the Middle East. And she had to give remarks at the residence. And Condi Rice was known as being on message all the time. A lot of our work at the State Department is working on words. We pay very careful attention to words. Small words, hundreds of people will look at a speech before the secretary gives it and tweak words and change things. And she was known for never going off message. And she completed her prepared remarks with Tzipi Livni. And she said, I'm going to take a few minutes. I want to go off to say a few words personally. And her team around me just took this huge deep breath like, oh my God, she doesn't do this. What on earth is she going to say? And she said, Condi Rice, remember, African-American Secretary of State in the Republican Party, said, I grew up in Alabama as a little girl. And I never, ever believed I would be where I am today, but I am. She said, but to see what happened in our country yesterday, to see an African-American elected president, she said, party aside, I could not be prouder of my country today. And that moment, it obviously moves me still many years later, but that peaceful transition of power, that's what we stand for. And that's what Condi Rice, as a Republican, African-American, had to say about a democratically elected president the morning after. I've been so proud to serve, but that moment really touched me, and I wanted to share that with you.
I certainly appreciate you doing that. The unenviable position that I have now is we still have 4 questions, because that would be a great way to just do a mic drop. But I do appreciate that, and I think that will help me move on, all things considered. So Rafi, I'll direct this next one to you, and same format. I think that worked fairly well. What's the biggest foreign policy issues that you see facing your bureau in the next 4 years? And I know 4 years is a long time, but really kind of toward the next administration, what do you see the biggest issues that we face?
Thank you, Jen. This is a critical question, and I think this is exactly what transitions are about in terms of articulating clearly what are the priorities as we are moving forward broadly. I would say really there are 4 main areas within the Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs Bureau. The first is the protection of the climate and oceans. This is going to be a very important conversation, and former Secretary Kerry, who has been appointed as the climate coordinator and czar of the new administration coming in, will be playing a very critical role in this area. I would say a second area that is also going to be very important and will be part of our continuing international conversations is moving towards a sustainable development and circular economy model, talking about how do we look at development and how do we look at economic issues in a broad fashion that protects the environment and protects social communities around the world and focuses on issues of environmental justice. The third area I would say is combating air and plastic pollution. And many of these have overlap because of the connections they have to protecting the climate and the oceans. And finally, I would say the discussions around collaborating on science and technology, particularly as it relates to health and to space. And we're seeing that now in terms of the research that's being done to develop the COVID vaccines and the important work that's being done to coordinate our response to global pandemics, and also in terms of our space exploration. Those would be the key issues from the perspective of the work that we are doing in my bureau.
Thank you. Christy, how about you?
Sure. Yeah, our bureau, the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations, focuses on anticipating, preventing, and responding to conflict that undermine U.S. interests. So I think fundamentally that will not change. That will be who we are and what we do. We're a policy shop. We also do some programming to make sure and work to make sure that happens using analysis, using programming, and using deployments to help those endeavors. What happens is the world changes and that the conflicts change. So where CSO turns its attention is based on where those conflicts are happening. So we might tweak a little bit of our priority with a new administration. There might be an area that they want us to pay more attention to, but that will, remain to be seen by who comes in as our new assistant secretary to set that new direction. But fundamentally, I don't see our priorities changing from that. Thank you.
Thank you, and Kara?
So the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor leads U.S. foreign policy associated with human rights and democratic values. We have enjoyed, as I think my colleagues have stated, bipartisan support, and I would agree that our policies will probably not see major changes in priorities, but certainly and perhaps so in operations and tactics. We program about $370 million a year in foreign assistance to advance human rights and democratic reforms. Some of the issues I think that will be on the agenda is great power competition, the role of China, the role of Russia. When we look at human rights, we're going to be looking also about concerns about new tools of repression, things like digital freedom, internet freedom, use of internet as a tool of repression. Interestingly enough, in the past 10 months, we've had a very vibrant discussion about use of COVID restrictions as a tool of repression. Then I think another topic will be looking at the international architecture, our post-World War II order and the multilateral structure that we have, the United Nations and other organizations, and how we can more effectively advance protection for human rights and democratic reforms, or how we can continue to effectively advance protection for human rights and democratic reforms.
Thank you to all of you for that. And so the third question, Christy, I'll direct this to you. If a student wants to follow a similar career path as you have, even though you've stated it was fairly non-traditional, what would you recommend to them? What should they be doing now?
Yeah, it's a great question, especially having been a former high school teacher. I think one of the great things about the Foreign Service is you can enter at many different ages. We had people join my class at the age of 60. We had people join at the age of 21. I think that the average age of my class was 35, which is exactly how old I was when I joined. I think having a rich experience is incredibly helpful to being a Foreign Service officer. You never know when something in your background is going to come into play. I happen to serve as VPOTUS, Dr. Biden's photographer at the Western Wall because I had been a professional photographer in a past iteration, and they needed a female because her photographer was male, and he couldn't join her on her side of the wall. Things like that happen. So a rich array of experiences is very important. I didn't study international relations. I didn't go to Georgetown or SAIS. I didn't follow that path. I don't have a master's degree in international relations. My master's degree is in education. So number one, I would say be open, get a very broad background, study foreign languages, study foreign cultures, make friends with people who are different from you, study abroad. Hopefully COVID will end soon so that can happen. But I would just encourage you to live a full and rich life, taking in all of those different experiences. You're going to do well in the Foreign Service if you're comfortable knowing and learning about people different from you. And then whatever that path is that took you to get there, I was a photographer and a teacher, and then I worked for a contractor for a little while. All of those things have made me a better Foreign Service officer.
Well, that's terrific to hear. Kara, how about you?
Like Christy, I had a little bit of an untraditional path to the Foreign Service. I was a foreign language and comparative literature major in college, so it's unsurprising that I would agree with so much of what Christy said. Keep your options open. There are lots of ways to work in foreign policy from many different angles. I would really stress the importance in your educations of writing and communication skills, of foreign language study, of opportunities to engage in international activities like you're doing with this very event. A couple of pieces of advice. I'm going to pass on a few that I was given. Learn to listen actively, not just to speak. So be a radio that's on receive, not just on transmit. And then the other piece of advice is more one for interpersonal relations, and I've found it very helpful in the government as we have to negotiate many different political views and many different perspectives on our work. Don't let anyone know who it is you don't like. Be respectful of your colleagues, regardless of what your personal views may be.
Thank you. Rafi?
Yeah, I would say that I agree with everything that my colleagues have said. And I would add that there is no one right path towards the Foreign Service. I think all paths can lead to the work that we do in the Foreign Service and in the State Department, whether you're in Foreign Service or civil service roles. And I think the important thing, building on everything that my colleagues have said, is also the importance of curiosity, being curious about the world and asking questions, and looking at the world with critical thinking and assessing how you receive information and understanding that information and turning that information into knowledge. So it's important to be curious about the world so you can expand your knowledge and broaden your horizons.
Thanks for those responses. I come from a non-traditional career path as well, and so I'm really happy to hear that, similar to my own views, you're recommending a broad approach to getting where you are. We have two more questions for our panel today. Both of them are general. I'm not going to direct these at any one person, so I'll let you figure out how we should respond. The first one is, what do you recommend students consider when they create their own political viewpoints? We've had a few of these mentioned in prior responses, but what are some examples, or what was some advice you would give students as they try to find their political voice?
I'm happy to jump in really quickly because it's actually something I talked a lot about as a teacher in high school. I would challenge students to read from a variety of sources. I think it's, especially in today's age, it's really easy with, I know Facebook's not cool necessarily with the current generation, but whatever it is your source is, it's really easy to become friends with a certain echo chamber and to only hear those ideas repeated. So you have to challenge yourself to read from different sources. Be very aware of where those sources are coming from. People don't think about, I had this conversation with my own parents, where is this particular media source being funded? What is the agenda of the people funding that media source? What are they trying to get you to believe and to think? And when you go into that level and not just take something at face value because it's posted on the internet, what does this particular source want me to believe and why? How do they want me to act and why? And if you do that from multiple sources, you're going to come to a much more informed position. I actually had a teacher in high school, and I use this as well. If you're doing a debate, challenge yourself to take on the opposite side. Learn that opposite side well. I had to debate the opposite side of the Strategic Defense Initiative from the 1980s. And we were required, she asked us, she took a poll on current events. She asked us which side we supported, and she assigned us the opposite side. Challenge yourself to do the same. It might reinforce your values, and it might challenge you to move a little bit left or a little bit right or a little bit up, a little bit down. It just challenge yourself constantly.
I would add, I agree with everything Christy has said, and I would add also that understand that viewpoints, whether they're political or not, if they are to be healthy, can't be static. That they have to be able to evolve and develop and advance and adjust and adapt as circumstances, as the reality of life and of the world change. And I think this is an example of this is manifested in when we do international negotiations. We start with one position as the United States, and ultimately, if we are going to reach a consensus globally with our partners, our allies, and other countries, we have to reach a compromise that involves, giving and taking and having that discussion and being flexible. And so I think that's an important part of the political conversation and the diplomatic conversation. So as you're looking to develop your viewpoints and doing all the things we've been talking about, it's important to understand that this is not a static process, but an ever-evolving process.
Those thoughts are really good from my colleagues, and I would agree with all of them. I think the one piece that I would reinforce and highlight is engaging those who are different from you, whether it's looking at different news sources that you don't traditionally, whether it's seeking out friends who have different backgrounds and come from different experiences. I think one of the values that we advance is this notion that diversity is not just about tolerance in our history. It's a source of strength. It's about we are a country of varied backgrounds that is stronger than the sum of its parts. And that applies also to human relations. And I think Rafi's point about flexibility and compromise is very important. And that comes from being willing to engage those who don't think like you, don't have a background like you. And maybe, just maybe, there is value in a community that takes strength from that.
Well, and Kara, that is a wonderful transition into our last question, and something you've already answered, at least in part, with your phrase. I believe it was be a radio that's on receive. If you have one piece of advice you can share with the next generation that's going to help them advance and really become the generation of leaders that we need them to be, what would it be?
Actually, one of my pieces of advice was just what Kara said, so about talking less and being an active listener. I love the way she said it, being on radio mode. Actually, I read something yesterday by Stacey Abrams. It was an article on CNBC, wrote a profile on her, and she has kept a spreadsheet since she was 18 years old with her goals. And she revisits that spreadsheet to see where she is. That doesn't mean you keep the same goal. Sometimes you need to, adjust where you're going. But the very fact that she lays that out, I found fascinating. I'm much older than 18 at this point, but I love that idea. And she challenged people to not edit their ambition. And to you, the students listening to this today, I would just encourage you to do the same. Don't edit your ambition. If you're thinking about being, student council president, but you don't want to run, why aren't you running? Don't edit your ambition. Go for it. And the one other thought I want to leave you with is something a college professor stole from a graduate speech, commencement speech that same year, and I don't know who originally said it, but she told us, think about what you care about and live a life that shows it. And that has stayed with me for all of these years since my first day of college. I would challenge that of you as well, no matter what path it takes, if it's to foreign policy or something else. Think about what you care about and live a life that shows it.
I love that, Christy. It's living your values. I think that's just fantastic. The only minor thing that I would add, and this is more of a tactical point, but it goes to Christy's point about really seizing and going for it, is in seizing opportunities, seek out mentors. I entered foreign policy with very few personal experiences, few people in my immediate community who could give me advice on what this career track was about. I didn't have much exposure to it until I was in high school and college. But I recall, and this relates back to our presidential transition discussion, I recall one job assignment interview or one posting interview where I felt it was important to let my boss know that I hadn't voted for the current president. So I did. And that boss asked me in response if I had a problem working for the current president. And I said, absolutely not. And that his response was, then we don't have a problem. And that response forged such an incredible trust and honesty in our relationship that that person has become a lifelong mentor to me. So we have often different political views, but I find that you can still find incredible relationships, strong relationships that can guide you through your political voice and helping you make it yours and make it unique.
Those are some really fantastic responses. I mean, throughout, I'm humbled to be part of this, and I certainly appreciate personally your contribution. We're coming to an end of the end of our time together today. Before closing the session, on behalf of Envision by World Strides, I want to thank our speakers for both their time today as well as their contributions to the safety and prosperity of our country. I hope you each know how much your service means to us and how much we appreciate your willingness to help us guide this next generation of leaders into roles like yours. So I'll end by saying thank you from Envision and our network, and also be safe as we transition forward.
Thank you to our moderator and our panelists. We hope you enjoyed this panel session. Feel free to check out our other panel in the inaugural speaker series, as well as our program offerings on our website, www.envisionexperience.com. Thank you, and we hope you can join us this summer.